بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وجاءت سكرة الموت بالحق ذلك ما كنت منه تحيد ونفخ في الصور ذلك يوم الوعيد وجاءت كل نفس معها سائق وشهيد لقد كنت في غفلة من هذا فكشفنا عنك غطاءك فبصرك اليوم حديد آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Dhammatul qabr, the punishment, or what it says as the squeezing of the grave. Rasulullah says, Dhammat al-dhammatu fil qabr kaffaratun lil mu'min min madhi'atin ni'mah. That the squeezing of the grave is a source of what? Is the cause of wasting the favors and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is a form of purification for the believer.
Sheikhna, during COVID you were quite busy with janazah prayers and janazah preparations. You were quite involved in the whole process. Why?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I felt that it was also an important responsibility, since there were restrictions for who can take these kind of roles, and it was a difficult moment, for people who have lost their loved ones, because many could not actually come and take part in the funeral, and the number of people leaving this world was much more. So it was more of a necessity. Given also I'm slightly younger in age than many other scholars in United Kingdom or in London area, there was a need to kind of take this role and help out whenever possible.
What are the stages that one goes through during death? What's the most difficult part?
I think when you examine the Holy Quran, you'll find that over a quarter of the verses are related to eschatology, which is the study of death, afterlife, barzakh, and the hereafter. Over 1,250 ayat are present in the Holy Quran that discuss this subject in so much detail. There is no religion or faith that has so much focus on this area like the religion of Islam. And you look at the world of hadith from the Prophet and his Ahl al-Bayt alayhum salam, and they allow us to clearly have a understanding of the journey that each and every individual takes part. There are two things that we have no choice in whatsoever: life and death. Life, nobody is asked when they're brought into this existence, and death, nobody's permission is taken before they leave this world. And so as much as one is afraid of this subject, because it's the second most area that people are afraid of. It's called thanatophobia, the fear of death. There is a need to be well prepared and well equipped. Yet there is a very negative connotation associated with this journey. Many people have this element of apprehension, concern, confusion due to the lack of knowledge about what actually awaits them. The more knowledge they have, the more empowered they are to be prepared by it. But like anything else, like any illness or anything that we may face in life that's scary, there are ways to make ourselves in a better position in this regard. And I think sometimes we look at death in one aspect, one kind of angle, but there are a number of things that a person who is about to go through this journey experiences. The first area is the ihtidar. Ihtidar is that they are getting ready in anticipation for their soul to be extracted from their body. And in those moments, I mean, you've got to remember that in this worldly view, we categorize it in terms of time, but when an individual is moving to this alamul malakut, the realm, the metaphysical realm, the angelic realm, time no longer plays such an important role. So it could feel like it's a long period, but for the person who's sitting next to an individual going through the preparation to leave this world, it could be a few seconds. And the alamul, the ihtidar is essentially the beginning of the realization that life is over. It's not necessarily something that happens quite quickly. An individual begins to see things such as, for example, the shaitan. We are told in riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt that the shaitan comes at that stage and begins to try and make the individual weaker if they're weak in iman, and that's why we have ad'iyah such as dua al-adila, to try and put the individual back on track and not to be tempted by the whisperings of the shaitan. And that's where they begin to see Malakul Maut, the angel of death, ihtidar. And the riwayat tells us that the way they see Malakul Maut is dependent on their deeds, depending on the aqidah. And today, if you were to ask anyone, describe for me Malakul Maut, they would say, I'm sure it's this scary, humongous, evil-looking monster that wants to remove the soul from the body. But the riwayat tell us, on the contrary, it could be one of the most beautiful creations that human being has seen, or it could also be a horrific sight for an individual when they see that. And when they begin to see the angel of death, that's when perhaps the second area after ihtidar, which is sakaratul maut, begins to kind of materialize. That's why the Quran says, وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ ذَلِكَ مَا كُنْتَ مِنْهُ تَحِيدٌ. Amir al-Mu'mineen Salamullahi alayhi Nahj Balagha talks about the pain that an individual goes through in sakaratul maut. He describes it like a scissors that cuts flesh, and it is due to the soul being extracted from the body. I sometimes give this example of how, like, for instance, if you have something super glued to your skin or something else, and you're trying to pull it apart, it's very, very difficult because that is firmly attached to that substance or that material. So you're pulling it with resistance, and you might tear it if it's like a piece of paper or anything else. Similarly, throughout life, this nafs that we are kind of carrying, the body's carrying it, becomes so attached to this world that it becomes incredibly difficult to remove it. And the more it is attached, the more painful the process of sakaratul maut is, and the individual will go through that particular pain. But there are things that people can do, and I guess what the religion teachings of Islam want a human being to realize is that it's not all gloom and doom. The story and the subject of death is discussed in extensive detail so that we are much more prepared, so that we can help ourselves.
You participated in many janazas, as you mentioned. What was your first experience of death?
I remember when I was young, perhaps maybe 6, if I'm not mistaken, or about that age, as a child. I remember my uncle, my mother's uncle, was a very well-known scholar in Quranic sciences, Dr. Sayyid Dawood Al-Attar. He was a very well-known poet and an exceptional author. He had suddenly passed away, and obviously this was very distressing for the family. But we had to go, we were in Tehran, and we had to go and bury him. It was my first instance of looking at this and how it's done. But I remember next to the grave, the body was brought, and they were doing something which was quite unusual. I then asked my parents about it, and somehow they were trying to make sure that the marhum is completely gone. I can't remember what they were doing, pressing on the chest or any other, and I was wondering what is it that they do. And then of course I heard when I was older, and I was explained that because of the speed by which people die, sometimes their heart is somehow pumps again, so they're able to live, and therefore they quickly wash the body, they quickly are in the process of burial, so they do something next to the grave to ensure that they're completely dead. This was later something that I realized when I spoke to people who've gone through this process, because there was a khadim of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in one of the Western countries that I had the honor of speaking to, and I confirmed this story with a number of others who said that he had a heart attack. He was in his 60s and he had a heart attack, and he was rushed to the hospital. They tried to save him in Canada, but they were not able to, and they saw that his heart had stopped. The doctors tried, but then they declared that he was dead. One of the mu'mineen that was next to him said, I want to recite what is known as talqeen. The talqeen is very vital, of course. It's recited right at the moment when an individual dies. It's recited as when we are placing the body in the grave just before the burial, and then it's recited after burial as well. 3 occasions where talqeen is the affirmation of the belief of an individual. So he said, when I was reading this talqeen, after a few minutes I saw a movement, and I was surprised, but I thought that I was imagining. And then it has happened again, and I called the doctors, and then they switched on the machine that does the heart, and the heart was back. And they said this was a miracle. They couldn't believe it. This was only about maybe 10-15 years ago. And I spoke to the brother. The brother was the same brother who said to me that, I went through this near-death experience, and he was very grateful that Allah has given him the opportunity to return back. And very incidentally, those who were around him said that after he went through this experience of tasting death, so to speak, he became somebody who would not miss Ziyaratul Hussein in Ashura and Arba'een, and the khidmah to the Zuwar, something he didn't do before. And he would not say why. Something he saw, something he experienced, and he told me this as well when I had the honor to live with him a few days as I was reciting one of the centers. So he was the caretaker of that center, so I was able to really understand his journey. So then it began to click, all the experiences of people who have gone through this, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the opportunity to return back, like Allama Tabarsi famously, who was buried, and Allah tabarak wa ta'ala gave him his life back, and he had this particular nether that if he had life, he would write the famous tafsir of the Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved him through a person who came and tried to exhume the body to steal the kafan, and he realized that Allama was alive, and he was able to write this monumental works, the tafsir of the Quran.
I'm guessing you think a lot about death. Death, theologically, death, the jurisprudence, death, the stages. What about death on a personal level? Do you think on death?
I don't think I can do any of my work and any small amount of service that I do without reflecting on death. Because for me, it's the realization that I could leave tomorrow or even today. And the verse in the Quran that plays in my mind constantly is يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله. What have you offered for your tomorrow? And then constantly we are reminded when youth and youngsters die unexpectedly, or in an accident, or due to an illness. And this realization, I feel personally, is never something that is far from us, but we sometimes try to block it off. It's a natural human instinct to say it's not going to affect me for now, and I'm okay for now. I still have a few years to live for now. Personally, the constant visitation to the cemeteries, the involvement in the washing of the bodies, the taking part in the funerals and the prayers is so key, lest an individual feels indispensable or a sense of that I'll be here for a long time, or that death will not affect me. Similarly, when I went through my, the personal experience of my son going through a very debilitating, possibly a condition, that also put me in that place to understand that I may lose a loved one who is a young child, and so it puts everything immediately in front of our own eyes as an immediate realization. I lost a cousin of mine, 18 years of age, here in Iraq about 5 years ago, just before Majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He was electrocuted in his own bathroom as he was opening the tap. Somehow there was an electric current and he became electrocuted, and he died. He was 18. He had not yet done anything in life. And they found him like a wooden plank, because he was alone in the house. I think for most of us, what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends us signals, sends us messages, sends us alarm bells. And the Quran is very clear. وَلَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ بِأَيِّ أَرْضٍ تَمُوتُ. But sadly, which means no one knows which earth, which part of the land, when they will die. And this realization, I think most of us know.
Yeah.
But we choose in probably the Western world and other places. And I remember learning that cemeteries in the past used to be next to mosques.
Yeah.
But now they're far.
Outskirts.
In the attempt to try and make people think about that area being some other reality, some other realm that may not be as necessarily affecting us now. Whereas before, you go to the mosque regularly. And notice how even outside the school of Ahlul Bayt, or outside Islam, notice how cemeteries are in churches. Today when you go to churches, they have graves of a few hundred years, and this has changed now. There are cemeteries, but people don't bury in churches anymore because there's no space. But that's how it used to be as well. So in other religions, they had that idea too somehow, that you've come for church, you've come to pray, but also you remember those who've left this world. But I think it has also a spiritual dimension of the need to awaken the conscience of the human being, to humble them, to make them prepared, and to make them understand that it could be them next. When I wash the body, for example, I'm very careful because I'm thinking I could be lying there, and I would like somebody to wash my body with care and gentle approach. So I think if you look at Dua Abu Hamza Thamali, if you look at Najul Balagha, the references to death are so frequent that makes us realize that the true follower of the religion of Islam and the Ahl al-Bayt can never take this subject lightly, and can never succumb to the Western or other ideology that says it's negative and it's scary and let's leave and it's for the movies only.
So do you think you've overcome this fear? Death is a reality. It's one thing that no one can deny. No one can say, I'm not going to die. But do you think, and let's not, lie, or let's not hide the fact that it's scary. This sense of fear of leaving maybe your loved ones, leaving your family, the world that you live in, that some sadly attach themselves to, as you mentioned, you know, the attachment you have to this world, whatever it may be, al-mal wal-banoon. Do you think you've overcome that fear? And one, and two, do you think you've overcome that fear because of what you do? Do you think if you weren't participating in the janazah process, you would have, the fear level would have been the same? And I'm asking this maybe to say, if those that have fear, they may participate in these, and maybe to remove the fear.
It's certainly highly recommended to take part in funerals, and I've always said to people, if you can volunteer and take part in the washing of the bodies of the dead, it certainly makes us, because I speak to people and they say, I've never seen a dead body before, and that even adds to the concerns that people have regarding death and what happens and so on. It reduces it a bit, but I think the notion of being placed somewhere on the under the ground, where you know you are in a confined space and a realm that is unknown is the most fearful thing. For me though, the most element that I'm concerned with is the fact that I cannot then change something and I cannot correct it once it's over.
Not in your control.
That's it. Because today, if I have a wallet and it's lost, la samahullah, and the money goes, I can make it. I can work hard and earn the money. If there is, God forbid, a health condition, I can go and seek some kind of remedy and make myself better. If, for example, someone's upset with me, I try and correct that relationship. There is always a way. But death is irreversible. I'm not able to return back. I'm not able to correct things, except for a few things that we can do in this world that will help us, such as sadaqah jariyah, waladun salihun yad'u lah, righteous servant, the righteous son or daughter who prays for us. Amal salih, a righteous deed that we may have done, right? But generally speaking, is that element of the lack of the ability to change what has already happened, and it's all over now. You're completely in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that, I think, for me, keeps me on edge all the time.
Sheikh Mohammed, you're a brother. I've known you for a long time. May Allah bless you and prolong your life. But what do you think the hard or the most difficult part for you will be? Do you think when you come towards this, you know, this death that we'll all face, but personally for you, what's the most difficult part when you think about death?
I remember reading the story of Abu Dharr al-Ghafari radwanullahi ta'ala alayh, and there are indications that others may have gone through the same thing before leaving this world. They had tears in their eyes, and some of the companions, some of the Ahl al-Bayt sometimes would say to them, why are you crying? What is the reason? Are you worried about the journey of death? They would say, no, we are going to Rabbun Kareem. Yes, we are submitting to our Lord. But it's firaqul ahibba. It's the leaving behind of the loved ones, which is the most painful, I think, the most frightening thought. Because each and one of us has established an attachment with some of our family members, some of our friends. And the realization that you're no longer able to be with them. But also at the same time, I think what we have to work on, and I have to work on as well, is the thought that if I leave, there is a Lord that will look after them. Because you think, what will happen? Who will look after them? Who will do, you know, what I'm doing at the moment? Because you imagine a world without, you know, you doing all the things that you normally do, and you see it as bleak. You see it as scary because it's a massive void. But I'm not the first to die, and I'm not the last to die either. So it will, and it always has worked out. And there's always ways for people to live their lives and make things work. So that fear also is a false sense that Shaitan tries to place in our hearts to distance ourselves away from the readiness and the preparation itself. But again, another fear that possibly exists in our hearts is the questioning on some of the deeds that we may not have recollection of, the huquq of others,
The rights,
the
of,
rights
others.
of others, which we may have taken away.
Without
Somebody
knowing.
we may have upset without necessarily knowing. Something I have taken from someone and has not returned, and things like that. The other fear that I have is the whole focus in Islam is about ikhlas. It's all about sincerity. It's about doing it for the sake of Allah. What if I'm doing something not for the sake of Allah? What if the deeds I'm performing, whatever it could be, what if some of them is to somehow appease others? How will that be experienced in the realm of barzakh and in the akhirah? We have some credible stories from the Ahl al-Bayt and others where some deeds that we've done that are small have tremendous impact, both positively and negatively. It is well known about the story of Allama Majlisi, where he and another scholar said, whoever dies first, we ask Allah to come to each other in Alam al-Barzakh. And Allama Majlisi died. Then the other scholar, Suhaim al-Barzakh, said, you must be in a very good place. He said, yes, but not because of Bihar al-Anwar. He said to him, why? He said, the Malaika told me that one day you were passing by in the market and you had bought some fruits, and there was a child who was poor and he was begging, and you decided to give the fruits. That deed is greater than you writing Bihar al-Anwar. And it makes you think, wow, that is a very profound way of looking at some of these aspects in our lives. And inshallah, we can do everything that we can for the sake of Allah, but it's certainly something to keep us on edge.
May Allah bless you, Sheikh, and give you a healthy life, inshallah, in the service of the Ahl al-Bayt, inshallah. Sheikh, if you're inshallah reach that stage, do you think any of the actions that you've done, do you think these a'mal that you've done for the sake of Islam, for the sake of the Ahl al-Bayt, if you were to pick one of these actions and say this is the action that I can be proud of? And again, this is also a lesson to our brothers and sisters, as you mentioned, this action of qada haja, maybe that Allama al-Majlisi. Which of your actions do you think will benefit you?
Allah
From what you
I have not
research,
done
Sheikh.
enough, but I think generally I may not have done anything, but generally from my understanding, one of the most profound deeds that will help the individual in Alam al-Barzakh is wilayat of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, because we have a riwayah that says in the grave the believer will be surrounded by a number of creations of Allah, on the right, on the left, at the feet, on top, and they'll be surprised and they'll be pleasant because they will see that they are really welcoming and somehow pleasing to the soul. So he will ask, what are you? And the creation of Allah on the right will say, I'm the prayer. The one on the left will say, I'm fasting. The one at the feet will say, I'm Hajj. Then there is a creation greater, more in charge of things, right? And oversees the other creations of God, these nurani objects in Alam al-Barzakh, Alam al-Mithal, as they say. And it says to them what to do. And the person speaks to this creation, says, what are you? And the response will be, Ana wilayatu Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. That loyalty and love to the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, without a shadow of a doubt, is very, very, very important. Now, I think the service to Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, I think Khidmatul Hussein is without a doubt something that will benefit each and every individual.
You mentioned, Sheikh, sorry to interrupt you, you mentioned Khidmat al-Hussein. This is our gift, inshallah. You can take this with you. This is some water from the Darih of Abu al-Fadl Abbas, from the grave for yourself, Sheikh.
Ahsant.
And Sheikhna, you have the honor of being Khadim al-Hussein. This is the flag of Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein.
Jazakumullah khairan jaza.
Will this be any of your benefit?
I don't think any one of us can begin to understand the magnitude and the excellence of the love and the service and the dedication and the ishq of Sayyid al-Shuhada Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein when it comes to barzakh and akhirah. May Allah bless the soul of Ayatollah Al-Udma Sayyid Mohammad Al-Shirazi rahmatullah alayhi. In one of his works, he tells us this story about the benefit of the khidmah of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, service to Imam Al-Hussein in barzakh.
Yes.
He says there was an alim in Iran, Tehran, who died, and his request was that he was be buried in Iraq. But it was difficult because the borders had been shut and his sons could not transport his body to Iraq, so they decided to bury him next to the shrine of Sayyida Ma'sooma salamullahi alayha. They buried him. After a few days, they came to visit the grave of their father. They saw a group of people sitting next to the grave, crying, serving anyone there, distributing food, putting water on the actual grave of their father. So they were surprised. They came to them and said, "Do you know the person who has died?" They said, No, we don't know." They said, those people asked those, "Who are you?" They said, "We are the sons of this person. Tell us, why are you doing this?" They said, "We'll tell you." They said, "Our father died a few years ago. He's buried in this cemetery. And when he died, we saw him in a dream. He was not a righteous person. He had done many wrongs and he was being tortured. He was in a very bad state. We saw him last night again. And he said, in the last 2 days, I am in a much better place. I am in much more relaxed, much, less pain. I am very much at ease." They asked him why. He said, there is a great person who is buried in this area, in this cemetery, who's just been buried.
Yes.
And Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein came to visit him. And when he came to visit him, the malaika, those responsible, all eased, put aside anything that they were doing. And we felt a breeze of, joy and happiness. So the son said, we realized it was this individual. And he was a khadim of Imam Al-Hussein. He was a khatib. He would speak to people about the musibah of Sayyid al-Shuhada salamullahi alayhi. And when you hear these stories, it inspires you. When you hear these stories, you get really motivated that alhamdulillah, we are following individuals who are truly going to help us not only in this world, but in barzakh and also in akhirah. It is well known that there was a person who would help the majalis of Imam Al-Hussein. So some people came to him and said, we want to establish a majlis. So he said, here is the check. Write whatever you want and I'll sign it. So they said to him, how can you sign a check without knowing the quantity? He said, I do not look for the amount when it comes to majalis Al-Hussein.
Ya Hussein.
So he looked away, and he used to wear glasses normally. He took it away so he doesn't see the figure. And then he signed
the check.
He died many years later, and they saw him in Alam al-Barzakh in a dream. They said to him, how is your state? He said, I am in a very good state. The malaika said to me, you took away your glasses and did not see the amount because it's khidmatul Hussein. We also look away, we have been told by Allah, for your sins because of your khidmah of Abdullah. And these kind of things, I think,
will benefit.
Truly are wonderful to learn. Yes.
Shaykhna, may Allah give you a healthy life. Bless you, bless your family, bless your...
Ahsan.
But Shaykh, I have a question. Do you think that you will be ready to face your Lord? You will be ready for your grave? And the question is, are we ready for our grave? Shaykhna, we're in the land of Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein alayhi salam. We're in Karbala. We're in a cemetery in Karbala. It's cold. But we're all gonna face this one day. I'm sure you've stood on top of many different graves, loved ones, people you've served with in the community, people even maybe you may not know. And they've all had to face this, Shaykhna.
Sometimes we become speechless. Sometimes we look at this hole and we wonder, how will we survive? How is it that we can be there all alone? We remember the words of Imam Zain al-Abidin in Dua Abu Hamza al-Thamali, where he talks about this, when he says,
وَمَا لِي لَا أَبْكِي
لا مالي لا أبكي ولا أدري إلى ما يكون مصيري وأرى أيامي تخادعني. I see my days deceiving me. ولقد خفقت عند رأسي أجرحة الموت. That the wings of death are right next to me. مالي لا أبكي أبكي لضيق قبري أبكي لظلمة لحدي أبكي لسؤال منكر ونكير إياي أبكي لخروجي من قبري وحيدا حاملا ثقلي على ظهري أنظر مرة عن يميني وأخرى عن شمالي. It's dark, Imam alayhi salam says. It's tight. I'm alone. I leave looking towards the right and looking towards the left, carrying the weight of my deeds on the day of Qiyamah. And you begin, and that is what is so important, to be able to see this. Some of our scholars would dig a grave like this in their back garden so that they would constantly look at it. Some would stay in it and sleep in it overnight and then wake up in the morning and then realize Allah has given them an opportunity to live once again. It's that making it a real fact. Is that making it part and parcel of our lives, because it is something we will end up going to. But when I look at this, one thing that really makes me reflect is those moments where Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam buried his father Imam al-Hussein. How difficult it must have been for Imam Zain al-Abidin to have that grave, to place the body of his father Imam al-Hussein in a grave like this, to bid farewell without the head, without the neck, as he had requested a piece of cloth because the body was torn into pieces. But it is the truth, and that's what we recite in Talqeen al-Mawtu Haqq.
Shaykhna, how much will that flag benefit you? May Allah prolong your life, Shaykh, and give you a healthy life. And inshallah, when you are ready to face your Lord, Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein alayhi salam will intercede for you.
Ajma'een, inshallah. Ajma'een. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام على أهل لا إله إلا الله من أهل لا إله إلا الله. كيف وجدتم قول لا إله إلا الله بحق لا إله إلا الله. ارحمنا بلا إله إلا الله. محمد رسول الله. علي ولي الله. تلك الدار الآخرة نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا والعاقبة للمتقين.
تجيبه احنا غير حسين ما عدنا وسيله ماكو حتى غير حسين بس احنا غير